My Lords, I would like to begin by adding my personal apology to those who have spoken in this House on previous occasions about the tragedy of contaminated blood, and to reiterate that the Government recognises the terrible impact this has had on many thousands of lives. The Government recognises that the previous inquiries into the events that led to the thousands of people being infected with HIV and/or hepatitis C through NHS-supplied blood or blood products did not go far enough. That is why, on Tuesday, the 11th of July 2017, the Prime Minister committed to establishing a further inquiry so that the causes of this tragedy can be fully understood. Once established, we want that inquiry to be fully independent. However, before it is established, there is a need to define the scope and format, so that terms of reference may be set by the relevant Secretary of State. Given the impact this tragedy has had on so many lives, it is vital that we get this right, and that we get it right from the start. I am aware of the concerns that have been raised this week by those affected, campaign groups, and by members of the House, and indeed I spoke to the Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull North on Tuesday about this very issue. I would like to reassure the House that the Government has as yet made no final decisions on the scope and format of an inquiry or on its leadership. I have newly taken on this policy area, and I am keen to make sure that all those affected are given an opportunity to give us their thoughts and opinions. I understand that it is normal practice for public inquiries to be sponsored by the relevant department. However, in light of concerns raised, we are keen to listen to those concerns and ensure they are addressed, which is why we are in discussions with Cabinet Office and colleagues across Government to ensure that this inquiry does its job and does it well under appropriate leadership. That is why an early consultative meeting was scheduled today, hosted at Cabinet Office, where the Secretary of State and Ministers hope to understand further the important views of those affected about the shape and establishment of the inquiry. This is the first of several meetings that the Government would like to offer over the coming weeks. I strongly encourage anyone affected to give us their views. Our door is open to anyone who wants to discuss the inquiry or raise any concerns they may have. It is important to note that whatever arrangements are agreed for this independent inquiry, there will be safeguards put in place to ensure independence. For instance, by ensuring that the Secretary to the inquiry never worked at the Department of Health or any of its agencies. We are absolutely committed to a thorough and transparent inquiry, and we want to establish the best format and remit. That is why we want to hear as many opinions as possible, and we will work with those affected and members of this House in order to do so.
I thank the Noble Lady the Minister for repeating the Minister's response in the Commons. While we, of course, very much welcomed last week's announcement of the public inquiry, we are dismayed at the lack of sensitivity and understanding shown by the Government in the way it's gone about consulting with the victims and survivors on the inquiry's terms of reference. The Noble Lady the Minister has underlined that no final decisions have been made on the scope, format or on leadership of the inquiry, and that the Government is in discussions with the Cabinet Office to ensure cross-departmental involvement. We on these benches say categorically that the Department of Health should have no role in how this inquiry is established or conducted. Can the Minister please give the House this assurance today? And can the Minister also place on record her acceptance that true and meaningful consultation should now take place, and tell us how the Government intends to make up for its deeply regrettable start on such a vital issue?
Can I interest? Sorry. Oh, I do. Oh, I'm so sorry.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Baroness for those questions. It is normal for the Department to sponsor an inquiry, the relevant department to sponsor an inquiry, and the Department of Health is the sponsoring department. We're listening to this, and that is why the Cabinet Office has joined the discussions, and indeed other departments may well be involved at all. We are absolutely committed to an independent inquiry, and the Cabinet Office Propriety and Ethics team have been liaising with the Department of Health about this inquiry. As regards how people can make sure that they are able to consult, we are sending out 3,500 letters this week, or the beginning of next week, going out to all beneficiaries of the schemes, and indeed MPs as well will also receive the letter. The letter will state clearly how to make contact so that people can put their concerns, ideas and representation, etc.
Welcome the fact that we're to have a proper inquiry at last and that it will be fully independent. I also welcome that the Secretariat to the inquiry will be someone who's never worked in the Department of Health. However, the remit of these inquiries always has an enormous effect on the deliberations and the outcomes. Victims are concerned that it could be the Department of Health that will sign off the remit. In order to be seen as completely independent, will the Minister consider which department would be more appropriate than her own for signing off the remit, perhaps the Cabinet Office? Secondly, the inquiry must have statutory powers, not just to summon witnesses, but to compel them to appear, as well as to receive documents. In a debate in another place last week, the Minister seemed to see two alternatives, either giving the inquiry these important statutory powers or providing, quote, a Hillsborough-style panel which would allow for a sensitive investigation of the issues, allowing those affected and their families close personal engagement. My Lords, I do not see these as two alternatives. If the inquiry is properly constituted and the remit set down by an independent body with the approval of the victims, it could command their trust and close personal engagement could then be achieved. However, these inquiries usually take a long time, and the victims of this scandal need help now. So how will the Minister ensure that victims have access to the compensation they deserve in the short term? Will she reverse the decision made in April not to increase the compensation payments in line with inflation? And will the Minister set a date for responding to the consultation on the support scheme, which closed in April?
As regards the set-up of the inquiry, no final decisions on how it is going to be has been decided, and that will be taken into account following the consultations. As indeed the Noble Baroness said, there are two possible ways of doing it, either by a statutory inquiry, which involves a judge, which means they can order witnesses to appear, or indeed rather like the Hillsborough panels, which is more families first, but they can't force witnesses to appear. There's no decision yet, and that will all be part of the consultation over the summer before a decision comes in September. As far as the other queries that the Noble Baroness mentioned, I don't really want to go into now, during this session, about what happened before. This urgent question was very much about how the inquiry is going to be set up. But I understand her concerns about the consultation. I don't know of the date yet. If indeed when I go out I find a date has been agreed, I will make sure I write to the Noble Baroness.
My Lords, my apologies for standing up earlier. And I must declare my interest as President of the Haemophilia Society. The Minister will be aware that the Haemophilia Society and others boycotted the meeting this morning to discuss the remit of the inquiry because of the involvement of the Department of Health. My Lords, the Department of Health, of course, are going to be the main subject of this inquiry. Why, for example, did the Department of Health continue to allow contaminated blood to be given to patients even when it was known to be unsafe? Which documents were shredded by Department of Health officials, and why? It is surely preposterous for the Department of Health to be able to restrict the inquiry by being involved in setting the terms of reference or the remit. It just gives them enormous power over something where they should have no power at all. Can the Minister ensure that the decision on the remit of this inquiry will not involve the Department of Health at all, and that the inquiry will be a statutory inquiry to ensure that witnesses can be required to give evidence so that justice can finally be given to these incredibly innocent and incredibly badly affected victims?
I thank the Noble Baroness for the question. Indeed, we are very aware of the worries that the various members involved in this have, and that is why an early consultative meeting was scheduled today, hosted at the Cabinet Office. And as I said in the statement, where the Secretary of State and Ministers hope to understand further the important views of those affected about the shape and establishment of the inquiry. This is the first of several meetings, and over the summer, following the response that they get from people following the letters, we will indeed be going forward and making a decision and listening to what everybody is saying. I can guarantee that.
My Lords, as a Member of Parliament, around 30 years ago, I was approached on this very tragic issue and became involved. And could I ask my noble friend to listen very carefully and to talk to the Secretary of State about the point just made by the noble Baroness Chisholm. We cannot have a department that is judge and jury. It is the Department of Health that is being investigated. We need, I would suggest to my noble friend, a judge presided over inquiry and answerable perhaps to the Cabinet Office that has been mentioned, perhaps the Department of Justice, but it cannot be to the Department of Health. And I would urge my noble friend to take that message, which I rather infer is supported throughout your Lordship's House, to the Secretary of State.
I thank the noble friend for his question and indeed for all he did all those years ago. I think it's become obvious today from the urgent question when it was repeated in the other place about the feelings, and I think it's become clear today the feelings in this House, and I'm sure the Department of Health are listening. I can't stand here and categorically say what's going to happen, but I can say that they are listening and they are very aware of the deep feeling that everybody has on this subject.
Well, on a narrow point, and on the point that has just been raised, it is not the department that needs to listen. It's Her Majesty's government that needs to listen as to who is to draw up the brief for this inquiry.
What my noble friend is saying.
My Lord, could I ask, Minister, will America be involved as well in this inquiry? Because it was they who supplied the contaminated Factor 8.
I can't categorically say whether they will be involved, but certainly the point about the inquiry that is going to be far-reaching and go into every avenue to be able to get the proper result that we want. So I'm sure that will be considered.